Okay, I want to talk to you about scrolling shooter games. I've had a lot of requests for different items students were interested in learning how to do. How do you shoot bullets? How do you have explosions and sounds and things like that? So what I'm going to do on this tutorial, and I might need to break it into small chunks or whatever, I'm just going to go over some basic ones. I created a type of Road Warrior game. I called it Road Warrior. If you ever saw the movies, Mad Max and Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome and all those other movies. Anyway, the Road Warrior. I got a car that was somewhat similar to his. I grabbed some sprites. And I want to have this where, well, let me just demonstrate the game, and you can see what I'm talking about here. See, there's all the things that the students wanted me to show them how to do. All right, so here we go. Okay, we start our game. See how the background is scrolling. I've got a Jeep there. It kind of comes at me. I got these little rocks. I can drive over the little rocks. I can shoot bullets. And you can hear the explosions when I shoot the Jeeps. All right, now if I run into a big rock, it kind of explodes. Now this is incomplete. I haven't finished. All right. So let's take a look at a little bit about how we do it. On a scrolling shooter, first thing, I wanted to make sure I had a foreground image. I used a little image, called it back sand for background sand. I tried to make it so it would tile. It looks like little triangles, but oh well. It's the best I could do at this point. I did a tile horizontal, tile vertical. If I take those off, you'll see that it's just one little graphic. Put those back on. Now, you can set horizontal speed, you can set vertical speed. Okay, we want it to go a little bit faster of a background. He is a car, he should be driving a little bit faster. We can change it here. And what that does is it just moves the background a little faster. Okay, so if you want to do a scrolling shooter, it's a good idea to set the vertical or horizontal speed. Now, if you want to be pointing down and have everything coming up, you would just put a vertical speed of -4. If you want to go from left to right, you could do, for example, 4 and 0. You want to have everything come at you diagonally, do it this way. Let's see what happens there. It'll look a little bit odd, but I think it will work. They're set there. So to just demonstrate, wow, I'm having vertigo. Part of the problem is all of my objects are moving straight down. Okay, but you can do that. All right, let's go back to where we were at before. We're doing a vertical speed of 4. Get the background. Let's talk about our car. The first thing I want to talk about, I think, is bullets. Okay, in other tutorials we talk about movement and things, so I want to just focus on the car from when he fires a bullet to when the bullet destroys an object. Okay. Now, the first thing I do is I want to have a way of making it so I cannot keep firing a bullet. And so I decided I would have it so I could only do it about every third of a second I could shoot another bullet. So this is just one way to do it. Upon creation of my Mad Max, I set the variable, I created a variable, I called it can shoot, I set it to 1. Now we're using kind of a Boolean idea here, whereas where 1 is true, 0 is false. So we're saying we can shoot. Now I could have set that to true also. I believe that would have worked. Now, so if I want to shoot, I'm going to hit the space bar. So I look at the space bar. And the only way it's going to shoot a bullet is if can shoot is equal to 1. So if it's 1, at the very beginning of the game it is, it's going to create an instance of my bullet object. Okay? And it's the key here on this is create instance, applies to self. You have to identify the object, which is object bullet 1. I gave it an X value of 0, so it's centered with the car. And then I gave a Y value of -16, which is above the car. Of course, I had to check relative. If I didn't do that, it would be off the screen. And so we have to check relative. So this is as it relates to the position of the car. One of the things you should look at is looking at the bullet. Notice how I made the sprite there. It's 2 bullets side by side. So let's go back to Mad Max again. Now, the moment I create my bullet object, I set can shoot to 0. So from here on out, unless something changes, I can't shoot another bullet. But I set it up as an alarm. So I take alarm 0, I set it to 10. Okay? Just looks like this. Number of steps is 10. I chose alarm 0. Okay? What's going to happen when alarm 0 goes off? I'm going to reset can shoot to 1 again. So now I can shoot again. So I use the timer to prevent me from continuing to shoot. Okay, so that's how we create a bullet. Okay, right now, all I showed you is how I go from hitting a space bar to having a bullet get created. Well, let's see what the bullet does. Okay, on the bullet, I did a create event. And we set the vertical speed to -8. Applies to self. It is not relative. Okay? So negative means it's going to go up because it's vertical. If I gave a +8, it would go down. Okay? So -8 means, first of all, that's faster than my car can move. Let's go back to Mad Max. So if I go up, I'm going to go by a value of -4. In fact, notice what happens here. I say as long as y is larger than 101, and 101 is 101 pixels from the top of the screen. And I could have picked any value I wanted. As long as it's greater than 101, and it's 101 or more pixels off of the top, I will then jump ahead by 4 pixels. So it's jump to position 0, -4, check relative. Okay, that's how I move up. So -4 at every cycle is as fast as I can go. The bullet goes twice my speed. Okay, it's a very slow-moving car, and it's there's not a lot of action going on. So just to understand, it's a little bit on the slow side. Now, enough about that. I said we'd go over the bullet. Okay, I'm not sure why I had this up here. If x is smaller than -16, I think what I meant to do, if y is smaller than -16, in other words, it goes off the screen 16 pixels, it just destroys itself, which is good because that keeps it from having all these bullets out there going. Right? By destroying it, it cleans it up out of memory, and it should help the performance of the game. So on the bullet, if it goes off the screen right here, it will be destroyed. So let me just remind you, it's a variable of y. Okay, we're talking about its own y value, -16. As long as it's smaller than that, -16 or lower, we destroy itself. Okay, that's the bullet. Now we got to talk about what happens when the bullet hits, for example, our Jeep. So I go to Jeep. And now, I'll talk about the Jeep in just a moment, but for now, we've got this object bullet collision with the Jeep. So if the bullet hits the Jeep, we're going to play the sound called sound explosion. Notice the looping is set to false because we want it to play one time only. And of course, I just loaded the sound. I have explosion 1, explosion 2. Just plays the sound. Now, I'm going to destroy the other instance. Okay? So that destroys the bullet when it collides with the Jeep. Okay? So the bullet gets destroyed. Did you notice there is no other destroy on here? So the Jeep actually doesn't get destroyed. So what does happen if it doesn't get destroyed? Well, first of all, we create an object explosion. Okay? That object explosion I've already created. I'll show you that in a moment. Okay? It just generates an explosion, and we set it exactly where the Jeep happens to be, and we checked relative. Okay? So that just creates an explosion right where the Jeep is. So if the Jeep doesn't get destroyed, what happens? It actually jumps. Now take a look at this. Okay? If we set an x of a random value, and we pass it a number, it's going to pick anywhere between 0 and that number. Okay? But I put room width. So in other words, it might be on the far left, it might be all the way to the right, because the width of the room, by the way, x of 0 is on the far left, and then however wide your room happens to be, that's far right. Okay? So if it happened to pick the width of the room, it would be on the far right side. If it picked 0, it would be on the far left. So it puts it in a random location, left or right, anywhere along the top of the screen, but it also moves it 150 pixels off of the screen. So now the Jeep is still alive. It's just magically up above the screen. And it's going at a speed, and eventually that Jeep will end up back on the screen again. But because it's going to appear anywhere in a random location, left or right, it'll look like it's another Jeep, right? Because we saw it explode, so it must be gone, right? So basically, this is just respawning off the top of the screen far enough so that when it finally appears again, then we'll see it again. Okay? So the last thing is we add to our score. And if you're doing a two-player game, make sure you are adding the score through a global variable for the other, or instance variable of the other object. Okay, so that's the object bullet. Okay, if it collides with the Jeep, we play the explosion, we delete the bullet, we make an explosion in the same location of where the Jeep is, we move the Jeep, respawn above the screen somewhere, and then we add to our score. The last thing you should know is on our Jeep create, we set the vertical speed here. Now, of course, if you want to make it more interesting, you could give it different random values. And you could also set the vertical speed at a random value after it collides with the bullet. So that could be an interesting little functionality here. So let me just add that real quick. And I'm just going to set it as vertical speed, but I'm going to do it as GML. I'm going to write it as a script. So I grab control, I grab execute a script, which is under control. It's this under code. And now let me get the GML function for setting the vertical speed. All right, this is pretty easy. It's not a function. It's just vSpeed equals, and then we're going to give it a random, and then I believe we can give it 4 values. Or give it 2 values, between 4 and, let's say, 7. So we have different speeds here. It doesn't like random, so let me double check and see which one I want to do. I believe it's random dot. Nope. Okay, let me check on that. I should have guessed. It's random underscore range. And now we're going to give it a value between 4 and 7. It likes it. Check it out. All right. Should relate to self. Applies to self. Let's see if that works. We'll test it out, and then I think we've covered explosions, shooting weapons. Well, I gotta shoot some Jeeps for this to happen. By the way, the same technique that we used to create our, look at that Jeep. Ooh, he's going fast there. And I just got killed. All right. So that was faster. The other thing I should point out is on your Jeep. We're on Jeep 1. We also have one more thing, and that is step. If Y is larger than the room height, we're going to jump, and we're going to do the same thing we did when it got shot. We're just going to jump to a position 100, and this time 165 pixels above the screen, and some random location left to right. So that's what happens at the end. All right, in a later tutorial, we'll cover some of the other techniques, so stay tuned for that.